Okay, so we're going to try something a little bit different because one of the students that I talked to said that it helps when I'm in front of the camera. Let me know if this works better. If it does, great. If it doesn't, then I'll switch back to just recording the screen. All right, so integumentary system. Let's talk about the types of skin that we have. We actually have 3 types of skin, and you can't see that. So, give me a sec. Okay, a little better. So, we actually have kind of 3 types of skin on the body, but 2 main types, and then one of those has kind of 2 subtypes. So, we have thin, hairy skin, which is going to be over here. And one of those would be found pretty much all over the body except for the places that we get hair after puberty. So that would be this end here. This would be like your head hair, okay? So it's the thin, hairy skin of the scalp. Now, the other thin, hairy skin we have is places where we get hair after puberty. So, for example, your armpits or the axillary region, if you want to be all fancy about it. But the axillary region is a bit different, and I'll explain why in just a little bit. But just realize that we've got kind of 2 thin, hairy skins. Now think about it this way. Okay, I'm trying to get ahead of myself, so I'm going to stop myself. All right, the last type of skin that we have is thick, hairless skin. Now, thick, hairless skin is going to be what you find on the palm of your hands and the soles of your feet. I don't want hair on my hands or my feet. Now, why don't I want hair on my hands or my feet? Think about it this way. If you're trying to get away from a predator and you have those fuzzy Muppet socks that everybody seems to have, think about how far you slide on the floor, right? Okay. Can't have that if I'm trying to get, living out on the Serengeti, trying to get away from a predator. That doesn't work. Same with your hands. Imagine wearing furry gloves and trying to catch an antelope. It doesn't work real well. So the places where we have this thicker skin, we have no hair. Everywhere else that we've got thin skin, back, front, legs, arms, face, head, anywhere else, we're going to have hair, okay? But these 2 places, the palms of our hands and the soles of our feet, no, we're not. So let's talk about the layers of the skin. We've got 2 primary layers to our skin. So here's the skin, okay? We've got the epidermis. Epi means above. That's a terrible marker. Try the other one. Means above. That's a bit better. So above the dermis, that's right here, okay? So if you look at the picture, there's kind of this scalloped edge right here. Anything from that scallop up to the surface is going to be the epidermis. Now the dermis, above the dermis, right? The dermis is right below that. This is that layer of skin that I told you when a kid pulls and pushes and wants you to come because they want to talk to you or show you something. This is the one that holds everything down. The dermis is from the scallops pretty much down to where you see fat. See this fat down here? This yellow blobby looking stuff? So this is the dermis. The dermis actually has a lot more going on than the epidermis. And then finally, at the bottom where the fat kind of starts, you've got the subcutaneous tissue, also known as the hypodermis. What I want you to notice though is it is not part of the skin. This is actually more like the foundation of a house. So the foundation of a house isn't technically in the house. right? You don't walk on the foundation of your house. You've got wood floors, or you've got tile, or you've got vinyl, or you've got something, carpet, on top of that foundation. So when it comes down to it, the hypodermis, also known as the subcutaneous tissue, also known as another name that I can't remember off the top of my head, is going to be the foundation of your skin. It's going to be what your skin sits on top of. Doo-doo-doo. Since you're watching me and I'm writing on the board, you're going to have to watch me erase too. Exciting, I know. So remember we said that we have two types of skin, right? So looking at the model, looking at the skin model, you've got this thin skin and you've got that scallopy layer going from here at the top to right where that scallopy layer ends. As well, you've got this layer here. Okay, this is the thick skin. Remember, this is the thick skin. So you can still see those scallops, but now the epidermis is really, really large. Again, there is a difference between the two. So you've got the thin over here and the thick over there, and you can definitely see that there is a difference in the thickness that you see. Now, the dermis, well, that's not helpful. Let's try this one. Good. The dermis, like I said, goes from right where that scallopy edge is till you hit a bunch of fat. So in the thin skin, this is the dermis. Here, again, you've got that layer where it's basically going to be from the scallopy edge down to the fat. And then down here where that fat is, I'm going to try the green marker, see if this will work. You've got the hypodermis, okay? Even over here, you've got that hypodermis. And you can see that hypodermis and where it's at because of all of these layers of fat, okay? So let's talk epidermis first. The epidermis itself actually has layers to it, layers of cells. Hang on one second. All right, lighting difference. So hopefully this will work better and you can still see me. All right, so this is going to be your epidermis. Your epidermis actually has 5 layers to it, okay? So you have this layer here, this layer here, this layer here, this little teeny tiny layer here, and then this layer on the top. Now, if you've been going through stuff in lecture, you already know that with the epidermis, you've got different layers of cells, kind of all the same thing, kind of not. But the layers that you have are called stratum. So I'm going to put that right here. Stratum is a very fancy way of saying layers. So stratum, fancy. Okay, the very bottom layer or the base layer is called the stratum basale. Okay, stratum basale is going to be the very bottom of your epidermis. It's going to be where you have mitosis happening and the cells are dividing. And as they divide, kind of like a conveyor belt, cells start pushing upward. So they never go down. One cell always stays at the base, the other one kind of goes up. And as these cells divide, they keep pushing cells up toward the top. This is the only layer that actually has the cell division. So all of the other cells that you see going up here are all going to be originating from this stratum basale layer. The next layer up here, that's kind of in this reddish color, is going to be the stratum spinosum. Okay, so the stratum spinosum, when scientists were studying this for the first time and they were actually looking at it, they decided that they wanted to kind of separate the cells and see what they look like. The thing that they didn't understand at the time was that these cells are attached to each other. They're actually attached to each other by desmosomes. So if you think back to chapter 4, when we talked about the desmosomes, you saw those two proteins that were kind of like magnets on the side, and then you had those fibers going through them as well. So when they actually pulled these cells apart, they ended up with cells that kind of looked like this, almost like a starburst. So when they decided to name the specific layer, because they did that and saw that shape, they decided to name it the stratum spinosum because they look spiny. The next layer up, this kind of pinkish layer up here, this is the stratum granulosum. Now you're probably going, okay, so grains? And you'd be absolutely right. When you actually look at the stratum granulosum in a slide, it looks like there are little grains inside of the cells. As we get to this layer, one of the things that the cells are making is called, of course I would forget what it's called now, keratohyalin fibers. There we go. Keratohyalin actually ends up staining looking like grains. So when, again, the scientists were looking and they saw this kind of grainy looking layer, they decided to call it the granulosum. Now, something else that I forgot to mention, but I'm going to mention now. Do you see these blood vessels down here? This is the only way that anything in the skin gets any type of nutrition. So as you get further and further away from this, as you start growing up here, you're getting further and further away from your food supply. Because when it comes to the epidermis has to count on diffusion to either get nutrients to the cells or take waste away from the cells. By the time that we reach the granulosum layer right here, we're actually starting to get so far away that we're going to start to starve to death and actually poison ourselves with our own waste because we have no way to get rid of them. So this layer here is kind of our transitional layer. It's the layer where at the beginning I'm alive, kind of sickly, but I'm alive. By the end of it though, I'm so far away, I'm already dead. So this is our transitional layer between living and dead cells. Now, the next layer up. This is a really special layer because you only, find it in thick skin. Okay? And this is called the stratum lucidum. Okay? The word lucid means clear. If you got a patient and they are a lucid patient, it means they know where they are, they know who you are, they know who themselves are, they know what they're doing in the place that they're in. If you have a patient who is not lucid, that means that they have no clue. They don't know who you are. They may not know who they are. They don't know where they are. They don't know what's going on. So you're probably going, okay, so they named it that because it's clear. You'd be right. So in thick skin, the stratum lucidum that we find, that's stratum lucidum, let's see, right there above the pink cells. I get out of the way and it'll focus better. So that right there. Remember I told you about the keratohyalin? These cells are full of keratin. Keratin is almost like a hard plastic, almost. And it gives our skin the ability to withstand rubbing forces and scratching forces and all of that. This specific layer takes about 5 layers of those cells and compacts them really, really tight, meaning that when you look at this layer on an actual slide, it doesn't look like cells at all. It just looks like one solid line. Now, they are so compacted together and so tightly packed that when we put stain on these slides, that doesn't stain at all. So it does kind of look like a clear line. Since it looks like a clear line, we call it the stratum lucidum. But again, you only find it in the thick skin. You don't find it in the thin skin. And then finally, we've got this last layer, which is this layer up here, okay? This is the stratum corneum. Okay, stratum corneum is the very top layer of your skin. In thin skin, it's not that thick, which you can see in the model, which I'll point out in just a minute. In thick skin, you have a ton of extra layers, but this is what people see. So when you look at people's skin, you're looking at stratum corneum. It is the very, very top layer. So looking at the models, let me pause while I erase. So looking at the model, we've got thin skin here, we've got thick skin here. Remember, we've got 2 different types of skin, so they're going to look different. See this one layer of cube-shaped cells at the bottom? They're gray. That's going to be the stratum basale, and we do have it in both types of skin. So you've got it here as well in the thin skin. Thin hairy skin, thick hairless skin. Stratum spinosum, again, we've got that in the thick skin, we've got it in the thin skin. Stratum granulosum, there's that purple. And you can see the speckles in the actual pictures. Well, hang on, let me bring you closer so hopefully you can see the speckles. See the speckles that are there? You can see it even in the model. They demonstrated it even in the model. So you've got that granulosum. You've got that grainy stain to it. Now remember, in thick skin, we've got an extra layer, the lucidum. So that's this white line that you see here. Notice, no white line over here in the thin skin. So you only have that stratum lucidum in the thick skin. Here's the corneum for our thick skin. Look at how many layers that is. That's a huge amount of extra skin. Whereas in the stratum corneum in the thin skin, we barely have any. Remember when you were little and you used to take a needle and you'd put it through your hand or put it through your finger and be like, ah, yeah, you were just up here. So you never felt any pain or anything like that because literally you were just in the cornea. Now, do that on the back of your hand. Yeah, no, you wouldn't, right? Why? Because it would hurt. So all of those extra layers in your thick skin actually help to make sure that this stays protected. Why would we want that? Think about it for a second. What do you do with these? Everything. I go to the bathroom, I use these. I get a drink, I use these. I want my phone, I use these. I want to pick up a pen, I use these. Your feet are the same. If you walk, your feet are going to be pretty rough, right? Anybody who's ever had a pedicure knows that they can take a cheese grater to your foot and take off all of these extra layers of skin and you're perfectly fine. And the reason is because, again, you have all of these extra layers of corneum that are there to be protective from basically your weight, whatever you're walking on top of. We're fairly lucky now because now we've got shoes. Shoes help to protect our feet even better. But back in the day when we were cave people, depending on, I guess, what society you lived in, you may have had shoes or you may not. I'll be honest, when I was little, I never wore shoes and it never failed. I got nails in my feet. I got staples in my feet. Anything you can think of that you can get in a foot, I got in my feet because I didn't wear shoes. And of course, my mother was like, see, God is punishing you. I told you to put your shoes on. Typical Hispanic mom, right? Anyway, so those are the layers of the epidermis. Now let's talk about the dermis. Remember, the dermis is underneath. The dermis actually has 2 layers. It's got this scalloped layer here where you can see the little fingers. This is the papillary layer, okay? Papillary layer meaning fingers, because it looks like somebody took pudding or Play-Doh and went with their fingers, okay? Now, the layer below that, from where those scallops end until you hit the sub-Q layer, is going to be the reticular layer, okay? The reticular layer is that layer that has the dense, irregular, collagenous connective tissue that has all the fibers going in every single direction, so that if a kid is yanking on you or pulling on you, you actually have something still holding your skin down. So when we talk about that, that's what we're talking about. So looking at your model, or not, that's the wrong computer. Looking at your model, you can see where those scallops are. So you've got the papillary layer with all of these fingers. They've just kind of peeled off the epidermis here. And then from where that ends to where you hit fat, that's going to be the reticular layer of your epidermis. So up here, try again. You've got the papillary layer. And then down here, from where those end until you hit fat, this is going to be the reticular layer. Okay, that's terrible. You can't even see that. Let's try it over here. Papillary layer. Reticular layer. Okay, so you've got these two layers within your dermis. And I'm going to pause while I erase, I think. So let's talk about nerve endings. Your skin is the outermost covering that you have. Being able to understand what's happening in your environment is really, really important. Being able to understand when you're cold or when you're hot, or when something is poking you, or when something is touching you. Really important. So having nerve endings in the skin is important for us to survive the environment that we live in. So the three types of nerves that I'm going to talk about are going to be the free nerve endings, the Meissner's corpuscles, and the Pacinian corpuscle, because this is what we actually have in our model, okay?